In August 2023, a Chinese company quietly put a phone on sale. No big launch event, no press conference, just a phone. And within days, it set off alarm bells inside the US government. Because when engineers tore that phone apart, they found something that wasn't supposed to exist. A cutting-edge chip built inside China that years of American sanctions were specifically designed to make impossible. The most expensive technology blockade in history had just sprung a leak on live television in the form of a smartphone. This is the story of how China is spending over $100 billion to build its own chip empire from scratch, to break free from the West completely. And how close they actually are will genuinely surprise you, in both directions. By the end of this video, you'll understand the Sputnik moment that terrified Washington, how China is making banned chips anyway, the one machine they still can't build no matter how hard they try, and the biggest question of all, is the Great Chip Blockade working, or is it backfiring spectacularly? So let's start with that phone, because the timing was almost insulting. The device was the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, and Huawei didn't just release it any week. They released it while the US Commerce Secretary was literally on a visit to Beijing. Inside was a processor called the Kirin 9000s, an advanced 7-nanometer chip built by a Chinese company called SMIC. Now, why did that cause a panic? Because the United States had spent years building a wall to stop exactly this. Huawei had been blacklisted since 2019, cut off from the world's best chips. And here it was holding up a phone that said, "We don't need you anymore." People called it China's Sputnik moment, the wake-up call. And it kicked an already massive effort into overdrive. Because behind the scenes, China had been preparing for this war for a decade. The weapon? Money. Staggering, state-directed money. It's called the Big Fund. And it has come in 3 giant waves. The first in 2014, the second in 2019, and the biggest yet in 2024, worth around $47 billion on its own. Together, those 3 rounds total more than $90 billion. And that's before you count the enormous web of local government money piled on top. This is a full national mission. China's official goal is to make 80% of its own chips and to build a complete, fully domestic production line by 2030. Every machine made in China. For comparison, America's flagship CHIPS Act put up around $39 billion in direct grants. China is playing a different game entirely. So here's the obvious question. If the most advanced chip-making machines are banned in China, how is SMIC building advanced chips at all? And the answer is a genuinely clever workaround. To carve the tiniest circuits, the world's best factories use a machine called an EUV lithography system, which China is forbidden from buying. So instead, SMIC takes the older, less advanced machines it's still allowed to have and runs the silicon through them over and over, again and again, building up the pattern in layers. It's slower. It's a brute force trick, but it works. There's just one brutal catch. Doing it this way means a huge number of chips come out broken. Reported yields for these advanced chips have been as low as 20 to 40%, meaning more than half can end up as scrap. It's expensive, it's inefficient, but it proves the impossible is possible. Now, here's where it explodes into the biggest tech fight on Earth: artificial intelligence. AI runs on chips, and the king of AI chips is the American company Nvidia. So, in 2025, the US banned Nvidia from selling even its watered-down China special chip to the country. Then, Beijing turned around and told its own companies to stop buying Nvidia entirely. 2 superpowers slamming the same door from both sides. And into that gap stepped Huawei, with its own line of AI chips called Ascend, racing to power China's entire AI industry by itself. Chinese AI labs, including DeepSeek, the startup that stunned Silicon Valley overnight, are already leaning on this homegrown hardware. The shift was so dramatic that Nvidia's CEO admitted the company had essentially handed the Chinese market over to Huawei, a market that was once worth a fifth of Nvidia's data center business. Gone. So China's winning, right? Total independence just around the corner? Not so fast, because this is where you need the reality check, and it's a big one. For all the breakthroughs, China is still years behind at the very top. Huawei's best AI chip delivers only around 60% of the real-world performance of Nvidia's H100, and that's a chip Nvidia released back in 2022. Even more telling, according to Huawei's own roadmap, some of its 2026 chips are actually weaker than its best chip from the year before. And here's the number that really lands it. Even if China churns out millions of these chips, analysts estimate it would still produce only around 4% of the total AI computing power that Nvidia makes. And it gets murkier. To build some of those chips, Huawei was caught sourcing more than 2 million chip units from none other than Taiwan's TSMC, smuggled in through shell companies, in direct violation of the sanctions. So some of China's self-sufficient triumph was quietly outsourced to the very island it's trying to make itself independent from. Which brings us to the one wall China still cannot climb. But first, the flip side, and it's the part the West is quietly panicking about. While everyone obsesses over the bleeding edge, China has been steadily conquering the other 90% of the market. The older, cheaper, good enough chips that run your car, your washing machine, your power grid, and a staggering amount of military hardware. You cannot build a tank, a fridge, or a missile without them, and China is on track to dominate the world's supply. On top of that, its homegrown chip-making equipment industry has rocketed from roughly a quarter of its needs to about a third in just 2 years, with one Chinese toolmaker now ranking among the biggest equipment suppliers on the planet, losing at the very top while quietly seizing the bottom. But that top is where the real prize lives, and to reach it, you need the one machine China still cannot build. You might remember it from before, the EUV lithography machine, the impossibly complex device that only one company in the world, the Dutch firm ASML, can build. China cannot buy it, so it's trying to build its own from scratch, and there are real signs of progress. Late in 2025, a prototype using a completely different approach reportedly came to life in Shenzhen, backed by Huawei. But a working prototype is not a factory. Analysts believe a commercial Chinese EUV machine realistically won't arrive until around 2030, and even then, it'll be years behind what ASML is selling today. So the wall is cracking, very, very slowly. And now, the twist that makes this whole story so fascinating. The blockade may have backfired. Think about it. The entire point of cutting China off was to slow it down, to freeze its technology in place. But instead, it lit a fire under the largest industrial mobilization China has attempted in a generation. It forced China to build what it never urgently needed to before. It handed Huawei a captive market of over 1 billion people with no Western competition allowed. And it may have created, out of thin air, the exact rival the West feared most. So the question haunting Washington right now is brutal. By trying to keep China down, did America accidentally guarantee it would rise? In the end, this isn't really a story about chips either. It's the story of the world physically splitting in two. Two separate technology universes, one Western, one Chinese, slowly pulling apart. We've now seen the whole chain, the one machine, the one island that uses it, and now the superpower trying to escape them both. And nobody knows which side actually wins. So here's what I genuinely want your take on down in the comments. Did the chip blockade protect America's lead, or did it just guarantee China would build a rival that never needs America again? If you were calling the shots, would you sell China just enough chips to keep it hooked and dependent, or cut it off completely and risk creating a monster? And speaking of monsters, China isn't only playing defense. It controls one resource the entire Western tech world depends on, and it could choke off Silicon Valley in a matter of weeks. And it has nothing to do with chips. That's the video on your screen right now. Go watch it. Thanks for watching.